Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We're calling an iso ball play. Everyone's clearing out, and Nate Bauer is the star of the show because Pat Kraft spoke yesterday. We're doing between the lines, and it's all Nate. All of it's Nate. It's all the good stuff that I love these off-season conversations. I can't wait to hear what he has to say about a lot of these things. And so we're going to get to that. Fitz is coming up on the show today. Don't worry. He'll be here for his recruiting update. We'll have the mailbag at the end of the show. We've got more things coming up, including Stan Drayton. He spoke yesterday as well. But Nate, welcome to the show. How are you doing today? And also, congratulations to the people at Thon. Did you see the number this past weekend of what was raised for children with pediatric cancer?
I sure did. 17.7 million. No, it's great. It's phenomenal. I don't know if I should admit this or not. I will. I used to have concerns about Thon in terms of cannibalizing other philanthropic efforts at Penn State. Mm-hmm. This is a place no one wants to go, but I there's other people that need help too, right?
Right.
Was where I used to stand. And then I had kids, and then I realized what that meant in life, and it changed my perspective on a lot of things, including how I feel about Thon, which is like overwhelmingly, it's almost too much, right? Like it breaks you. It breaks you to see what a lot of those folks are going through. But it also is like the best of Penn State, right? It is the best of what the Penn State student body does and the community around it that supports it. It's overwhelming, and it's a great thing, and something that everybody that's involved with it should be very proud of.
I remember in college meeting a guy who actually is a fan of the show, and a friend of mine from college, Ian, who was a Thon kid. And, literally you see the payoff of that in the people that survive. And I think that's super cool. You can't talk about it enough. You can't emphasize it enough. But that is where we'll have to leave it for today, because we've got a lot of stuff to get to. And as always, I've stuffed 8 pounds of show into a 5-pound bag. So we need to get to I love it. I love talking about all the things. So let's talk about Pat Kraft talking about all the things in today's opening segment, which is Between the Lines.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
The pivot. And literally, Pat Kraft starts out his press conference talking about a bunch of different things, opening statement. But then the first question is to him, Nate, is about NIL and Penn State and football's position in the NIL landscape. And he didn't really want to talk about NIL.
How about we change the narrative of NIL? It's marketing now. It's marketing dollars. I think with the new rev share and the 20.5, obviously we're going to invest the 20.5, and then it increases 4% every single year after that. I mean, we're doing that. I think from what people think the traditional NIL piece, I think we're where we need to be. Look, you got to continue to do what you got to do. But in this new system, you're going to have to show fair market value. And this is where the power of Penn State is a huge asset, because fair market value for the starting quarterback at Penn State is pretty good. And we've got to lean into that, and with our business partners. And so that's the kind of the new world of name, image, and likeness.
Nate, can you read between the lines there and tell me what is being said and unsaid in that conversation? Because it feels like, it feels a little bit like semantics. NIL isn't going away, but he wants to talk about the new world of revenue sharing more than he wants to talk about NIL.
I told you guys about this.
Do I have to?
A long time. No, don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't make me do it, because if you get one, and then I'm going to hit it. You get one more.
Yeah. No, look, it is the landscape has changed, right? The reliance on individual donors coming to the plate, and when I say that, I mean fans, right? Trying to pool the broad Penn State fan base to chip in $5, $10, $100, $1,000, $5,000, right? Like that's over. That's over. It's just not how you are going to fund it moving forward. And so Penn State athletics is not it's not lacking cash, right? You see the annual reports, you see what the revenues are. They make a ton of money. They spend a ton of money for sure. But you can carve out among your revenues the piece that compensates your players or pays for scholarships or what have you, right? Like all of those things are possible through revenues. And when I say revenues, it's ticket sales. It is marketing, right? It is actual advertising and business partners that Penn State Athletics has, that they can redirect that money toward.
So does this mean
player compensation?
Like Nike money is now part of the conversation? That Pepsi money, like any of their corporate sponsors? Like
what's what? That it doesn't matter. It all goes to the same pot. So the money that you raise for through development, right, with your major donors, like all of the money that you make can just go to the same place. You have that pot and then you divvy it out as you see fit. And so I think, and yesterday's answer hopefully clarified that, coming from him, of this is the thing that was for the last 4 years is no more. That's because it is now allowed, or it will be allowed, for the schools to make the payments themselves. And so it's just not, it was a major concern, and for good reason, because Penn State had a hard time getting off the ground because it was late to start. It was late to prepare for NIL based on the leadership decisions of Penn State's past administration in the athletics department. And then once it did start, it took a very conservative approach to it. So that time was spent trying to catch up to what other people were doing. Well, unlocking the floodgates of, hey, every school is allowed to do 20.5 million, whatever the number is going to be. When he says, when Pat Kraft says we're going to do the full 20.5, what he's saying is there's a bunch of schools that won't be able to afford it. They're not going to, like, there's a bunch of programs that are not going to be able to direct that full allotment,
because they don't make that much in order to give that full percentage to the players. Correct. So doesn't Penn State already have an advantage over those programs anyway? So comparatively, does this change anything for the competition and that glass ceiling that Penn State has been beating their head against for the last 5 years? I guess that's what I'm driving at, and that's my question in this situation.
It does not, in the sense that the program. So it does a couple of things. One, it opens the door a bit to the smaller universities that don't have the development, that don't have the NIL outreach to raise a ton of funds, right? That Penn State has to worry about people pecking at it from behind in the recruiting space, in the portal space, what have you, because they will all of a sudden also be able to compete in that landscape now because they can use their own dollars. The issue for Penn State is, it clears the way for Penn State to compete with an Alabama, an Ohio State, a Michigan, any of those places that are also going to direct their funds. But you still need that. Donor side of it to
feels
top
like
yourself off.
Yeah, it just kind of feels like, and I'm straying into some deep water here. So if we go too far, I'm shutting this down. It feels like dark money. Like it just, all the money is going to go into a pot. We don't know where it's all coming from, except that we probably have a little more transparency here. And it's just how many dollars it's still an arms race for dollars. It doesn't seem like that part has changed. And I guess, does this position Penn State better or worse, I guess? And I know I just asked you that, but that's still where I'm unsure about the future. I think it gives them a larger ammunition depot, but it doesn't necessarily change the size of theirs comparatively to everybody else?
I think that that's a fair way to read it. It helps in that they couldn't previously there were programs that were outpacing them that they couldn't dream of competing with in terms of offering a fair market salary compensation, right?
Let's give a direct comparison. Missouri took a quarterback from Pennsylvania, and that was a huge part of recruiting in the last cycle.
But that's also Penn State's choice to a certain extent. Penn State doesn't want to direct millions and commit millions on players who are right. James Franklin has a plan. He's had a plan for years. He's been laying it out for years that he wants to have a progression of sorts where you don't outlay a ton of cash on the front end for somebody who you don't know if you're going to get the return. He wants to reward the Drew Allers, the Nick Singletons, the Katron Allens. He wants those guys to have been in the program and pay your guys who have been through it. So it's complicated. I think it's an important step for Penn State to be able to allocate its money as it sees fit. It is still going to be an area though where if you're talking about the highest bidder, it's not a salary cap. It's not that everybody else is paying a luxury tax who goes above and beyond that 20.5 million. So because of that, you're still somewhat inhibited by what your power is in terms of development, in terms of bringing in those outside dollars.
Do you think that? So I guess that's the part where he led into talking about the fair market rate for a quarterback at Penn State. I understand that you're not saying I'm guaranteeing you dollars to a recruit. Like, we're not paying X million dollars for you to come to Penn State. At Penn State, quarterbacks earn X is the difference, I think, in the comparison there. But it is saying that the exposure rate for Penn State, the value of that starting position, is there and I guess the answer is in his question, it is in his statement, there is not a market rate for quarterbacks, I think, or running backs or offensive line. Do you think that there's going to be a normalization of this is what X position costs, given that generally everyone has that first pot of money to work from, and then anything else is your discretion after that?
Yeah, I do. I think all college football, the stakeholders, the people that are involved in it, at the highest levels, love the NFL. The NFL is the gold standard in terms of how it operates. It all makes sense. There's nothing about the NFL that isn't well thought out. Now, certainly, I understand there's going to be people who push back on that. But structurally, the way that the NFL operates makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of things that have been well thought out. Yeah. Your value is based on the market, right? It's just, you just don't see a lot of wild stuff in the NFL in terms of player compensation and value. The draft makes sense. All of that stuff makes sense. Positionally, it makes sense. And so do I think it's there right now? No, because you do have these outliers of programs that are willing and able to way overspend for certain players. I think that at some point, and I think that some point maybe has already happened or is coming soon, is donors who are part of that are going to say, I don't see the return on this. This is a stupid way to go about this, right? Yeah. I don't want my $4 million to go to a freshman quarterback. Now, I get it. There's some people who that money is like, even to billionaires, $5 million matters somewhat. I think.
Nobody's throwing around $4 million. That's a rich person, because that's not how I heard one of my favorite quotes is, rich people become rich because they find a way for other people to spend money on their behalf. Just generally, like, the value of money is not lost on people with a lot of it. Coin Intelligence Agency, we're all over the map today. Coin Intelligence Agency asked the question: does the money They'll help you lock in players with terms. Like if a university pays, they can put a number of years before they can transfer. Pat Kraft was asked about this yesterday. This is just a fact. I want to move on from this quickly, Nate. He was asked about this, and he said, I mean, what does that do? Are you going to sue the kid if he breaks the terms of the contract? And if you try to put those into a contract, Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, they don't do that. What's the incentive for the recruit to sign with you or the transfer portal player to sign with you over those other players? So once again, a non-standard landscape causes these competition race to the bottom in terms of openness, and not necessarily like a moral race to the bottom, just a race to the most open, lowest common denominator of rules in this situation, because that's how these things tend to work out. I want to get to something important before we move on, though, Nate, and I see like you're building up thoughts. I need you to take that energy and I need you to channel it into talking about beer. Tell me about Antifragile.
I can do that. Antifragile is great. They're the best. We went this weekend, actually. I had friends in town, which never happens, right? We're adults with kids. That's like my social life is gone. But to be honest with you, this is actually like a great pitch for them. They have this upstairs lounge kind of area that my kids were, how do I put this gently, not the best behaved that they've ever been on Saturday afternoon. But you know what? Me being mortified by that was totally misplaced because no one else in the bar knew it because they were upstairs. So if you have kids and you want to go on a Saturday afternoon, you can go to Antifragile and enjoy their best beer in State College, their vibe, their app. There it is right there. If you're watching on YouTube, couches to sit on, you name it. It is the spot for, in my mind, serious people, right, who like to enjoy drinks of any persuasion. There's excellent in-house brewed beer, but there's also cocktails, there's kombucha, and then outside, obviously, they have John's, which are the best cheesesteaks. I was only going to get one, and my friend insisted that I get two cheesesteaks to go home with on Saturday. So
it was so good they wanted seconds. That's awesome.
Listen, he was unwilling to take the chance that he would still want more cheesesteak after the amount of cheesesteak that he had in the first place. So it's the best. It's great. Love it. Please go visit them and tell them we sent you.
Are we clear to talk about the plans? Did we get this all cleared, or do we have to stay tuned?
I think we ought to stay tuned on that, big guy.
Okay. All right. Very good. Stay tuned is where we're going to leave that on. So let's get back to what you wanted to say about the conversation before we talked about beer. Or where were you headed down the conversation path with Pat Kraft and what we're just talking about with the compensation model?
Yeah, I don't think that Pat Kraft is suggesting this. I don't know if it's something that he would want, if it's that anything that the stakeholders in major college athletics want. But they got to become employees. Like the only way to make sense of this model, when he's talking about 1-year deals and transfer whenever you want, the only thing that's going to eliminate that and make some semblance of fairness for the sport is employee status. And there are tons of complications to that, right? Including the point that whether they understand it or not, employee status would benefit 99% of the participants of the sport, but the 1% who it doesn't, right? Everybody believes that they're going to become that 1%.
Right.
Right. So because of that allure of, hey, I don't want my salary capped and I don't want my value capped, and the fact that there is no stability in college athletics, you don't have anybody to organize them, or there hasn't been any right. It just hasn't made any movement to that end. It's just that all of this is sticky, complicated stuff.
We need to find a freshman quarterback that I think we've already missed the timeline, though. We need to find a Cam Rising who's been in college football for 7 years, because that's the sort of stability you need from a player representative in a unionization or something like that to get the ball rolling. And then, I think if you're appointed to that position, You should just then have eligibility for 7 years so that you can operate that particular role and maintain that stability. Obviously, I'm kidding. And I want to get to the final thing because we got to get to a couple other things on the show, including some recruiting stuff. But this is really, to me, the pivot that I'm curious if you picked up on this from Pat Kraft, talking about the model at Penn State is retention, believing in your guys, and your guys getting the whole, like, we want to be here because we're Penn Staters, blah, the kind of, I don't want to say blah, 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 but like the I'm trying not to say esprit de corps, right? I'm trying not to be the fancy.
That matters.
But that, right,
James
like
Franklin
locker room mentality. There we go. That's 100%. Locker room culture.
Culture is hugely important. James Franklin talked about it last year when they hired Andy Nittany, that he had a gravitas that attracted and was a step up from Mike Yurcich, honestly, that allowed for a better culture offensively, right? That stuff matters. And if you can't, like, there is enough evidence at this point to say the teams and the programs that are relying overwhelming, right? They are all in on transfers and bringing in any manner of trade, right? They're just going to reconstruct their team by half every year. Where's the success of that? It's not there. The teams
I think
that are
there's go ahead.
Look, this is tried and true, and people don't like to hear it. But it transcends sports. It transcends, like, whether it's football, basketball, you name it. Look at the highest levels of the sports. Young, inexperienced, and like transfers, all transfers, does not lead to the same levels of success as retention. If you stick with it, if you are good at developing your players, you stick with it, you keep them happy, you don't upset the locker room with wild, right, throwing tons of money at an outside position to backfill a need, right, which is something that you have to do occasionally, but you better make sure that it's worth it, right?
So let me just jump in here.
Important.
Let me just jump in here. Two things. One, I do think that program building can be just like if you're a new coach in the NFL and you need to bring in veterans to establish a culture and a roster and all those things. SMU did a great job of identifying portal talent that they absolutely needed to get to a certain standard. After a certain point, though, there are massively diminishing returns the higher you get in that development process. So I do think that certain teams can be successful to a point in building through the portal, but to your point, ultimate success does not rely on the portal. But that last point you made, I'm going to play two quotes back to back that are unrelated, but maybe related. And I hope this isn't fair. Here's Pat Kraft talking about Jim Knowles and then talking about the transfer portal.
The loaded Jim Knowles question. Look at, you go get the best. I'm going to go get the best coordinators we can, because I think you need to understand the coordinators set the tone. It's James' team. James is CEO. And I think James has done a masterful job of building the best staff in the country. And they are getting, you got to pay market, right? We all know we need wide receiver help. So we got to go find one. I think we have some really good ones in the building, but everyone knows, like, it's not a secret. So you go find that.
Paying market rate, you go get the best. Everybody knows we need a wide receiver. Hello? Is he just like screaming at the transfer portal? Like, is he doing the thing that James Franklin can't do? That would be untoward, or am I reading into that? Because
no, that's exactly what's happening.
Feel like very in the same spirit.
Yeah, James Franklin in his own way has done that in the past, when if you're in a post-game locker or a post-game press conference and the recruits that include some 5-stars, what have you, at positions of need, offensive tackle, you name it. This hasn't been within the last year or two, but he's like stopped what he's saying to shout upstairs to those families and those players to say, oh, if you happen to be a X,
yes,
like, hear us because we desperately need you. James Franklin would not say, to be honest with you, it was very funny to me because it's like James Franklin has his way of doing things. Pat Kraft has his way of doing things. Pat Kraft is a little more direct.
I was going to say, he's a little more like me. He's going to be a little bit more of a hammer than a scalpel. And I relate to that a little bit better.
I mean, it's a fascinating dynamic, and I don't think it's one that James Franklin necessarily would have received very well. But Pat Kraft wants to win a national championship. And if you're going to win a national championship, listen, I don't care who was listening to that press conference yesterday. Maybe it was nobody, but if there's one agent that heard that statement, that has a client, that is a receiver, that's good at playing football, and it happens to capture their attention, and there happen to be calls made, that's a win for Penn State. That's something that Penn State needs. So yeah, it was a very real edict. Is how I would put it, is, hey, this is something that has to happen for Penn State to get where it wants to go. Hey, call us. Hi.
I love it. I love it when even I can read between the lines. Thank you. Because I was like, oh my gosh, that is just like putting up a vacancy sign in the window, being like, please, we have rooms open. Please join us. And that seemed pretty obvious at that point. And he also, by the way, mentioned defensive end, Abdul. He started that quote talking about Abdul Carter and defensive end and losing talent like that to the NFL. Now, he did talk about backfilling. He wasn't necessarily talking about like bringing in another Abdul Carter, but still, things at the top of Pat Kraft's mind when you have those conversations seems like it should be somewhere we should take that conversation. Nate, final thought, then we've got to get to Fitz's recruiting update.
Strike while the iron's hot. That's it. And he knows it, and everybody else around Penn State knows it, and this is it. So,
well, speaking of striking while the iron is hot, we are going to be getting into the other half of this conversation, which is that recruiting and retention in Fitz's recruiting update. Nate will be back for the end of the show. So thank you for getting your insight here into all of that. I kind of want to ask you back tomorrow because there was like 8 things we did not get to today, including Beaver Stadium, but that'll be a conversation for literally a different time. Sean Fitz is here to talk about recruiting. Fitz, welcome to the show. What's going on?
Nothing. I've actually been with the show most of the time you guys have been on. It's been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate the takes, and I appreciate you guys talking about the NIL without me. It's pretty great to stay out of that lane because we've got Nate who does such a great job covering it. So no, it's really good conversation. So if you missed it and you want to be informed and educated on that stuff, go back and listen.
Of course, this Fitz's recruiting update is we put this out as a weekly video standalone as well. So I'll put a link here for you to watch the full show. You can watch Nate and I talk about Pat Kraft and NIL and all of those things here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. But of course, if you're watching this video, you're watching the live show at this point, you want to know about the latest in recruiting. And there was a recruiting update to the class of 2026 rankings. Fitz, there's a lot to get to today. What's most important in your mind about what we learned on Monday from On3 and Charles Power and all the rankings that they've updated from On3 Mothership?
I think we're going to dive a little bit deeper on this on Thursday with Ryan Snyder because we were covering that all day yesterday, and there's certain guys to talk about. There's certain guys that we want to get a little bit more information for this movement. But you look at the latest release of the On 300. Long awaited. Like, this has been something we've been talking about for a couple of months now. The last update for the 2026 class was in October. So that's a lot of film. That's growth. There's a lot of things going on. Camp season starting down south. So there's a lot of things that can change over that 4-month period or whatever it has been since the last one came out. So there's a lot of movement. Most of those guys uncommitted, but there were some Penn State commits moving up. Not surprisingly, Jasir Rogers. If you're on that train, it keeps going up. He's up over 50 spots to number 180 overall, firmly in the 4-star range. If I'm looking at guys moving up, I look at the industry rankings. I look at our rankings. I like where Jasir Rogers is. I like where Jasir Rogers is trending, and he continues to move in the right direction. I think when he gets out on the camp circuit, things will continue to go well for him. And Daniel Jennings, not a guy we talk about a lot. Way down there, the bottom of West Virginia. He's played in Virginia, right there by the North Carolina border. Like, he's down there. But he's a heck of a football player. He's not the biggest guy in the world, about 6'1.5", but he does kind of everything on both sides of the ball. And he's just a really, really just genuinely good football player. And when we talk about the edge board and the defensive line board in the region, and we'll get to a little bit of that later, Daniel Jennings right up there. He jumped nearly 70 spots to number 165 overall. So a guy that we don't talk about all that much in the class. I mean, he was very quiet when he committed, just because he committed right after, I think it was right after the Lash Bash. And it was one of those things where you just kind of were waiting on the season. So you didn't really notice a ton of it, but he's a really, really good football player. So encouraged by that. A couple of guys moved down, and this is where everybody gets the pitchforks out. But Kevin Brown down to 61 overall. I believe he's number 29. I don't like that move. I think he's closer to a 5-star than he is number 61 overall.
Is that a product of not having a season? Being injured.
I was just about to get into that. He was hurt this year, hurt his foot. He did come back at the end of the season. So probably an out of sight, out of mind drop there, moving down 30 spots. But when you are looking at parsing the top 50, the top 75, the top 100 prospects in the country, there's going to be some movement like this. And Kevin Brown, for not playing the full season, kind of gets dinged there. I think he'll come back up, to be honest with you. I know that there's guys that are ranked really high early, they drop and they never recover. I don't think Kevin Brown is in that mix. So my thoughts have not changed based on the number beside his name. We'll say that. Troy Hune also out of the on 300, 3-star prospect. That's something Ryan Snyder will follow up with Charles Power about. It's not something we're going to get into today on the show, and probably Thursday we'll talk about that a little bit more. But that was probably the most eye-opening thing, is Troy Hune, Penn State's quarterback commit in the class of 2026, down after this latest rankings release. Let's stay in the class here. I got a couple of guys maybe moved a little bit or not much at all that I thought maybe had a chance to break into that on 300. Jaquaden Guilford, the receiver from Indiana, really, really good player. And it's got the athleticism, got the size, got all those.
That surprised me.
Yeah, he's still a high 3-star for us. And then Matt Sieg, another one of those guys we don't talk a ton about, but the variance on Matt Sieg in terms of his rankings, I think he's a top 100 prospect somewhere. We still have him as a 3-star. I think he's probably in the middle of that somewhere. Back end of the on 300, it's tough because when you play, he plays at Fort Cherry, single A school in Western Pennsylvania. The competition is going to be up and down, mostly down. He dominates on both sides of the ball, but he does have the size to back it up. He's got the athleticism, the documented athleticism to back that up as well. So you've got a lot to like with Matt Sieg. He's 88 right now. Hey man, if he's the number 22 player in the state, boy, that's tough for me to handle. I think he's a top 10, top 15 player in the state for Pennsylvania, which is really good this year. Really enjoyed looking through the Pennsylvania stuff. I'm probably going to take a closer look at that this afternoon, see where guys have moved and where guys probably should be. But it's a work in progress, man. These are rankings in February. I say the same thing every year, is like, don't get attached because these things will change. So Penn State's class number 6 overall in the on 3 team rankings right now, 9 commits, and they'll continue to trend in the right direction, I think, as they try to get a top 10 class. And I think it's within reach this year.
And part of that is going to be regional prospects, as you always talk about, as we always harp, especially on the Thursday show. Most people who watch this show watch the Thursday show, but you should definitely check in this week as we kind of break down the on 3 rankings and some of the recruiting. We're going to get to this question right now because I believe it fits really well. This was a mailbag question submitted earlier this week, but I wanted to get you your thoughts on this right now. Carter Meadows is going to lead us off here in a second, but Blackheart asks, some pretty massive movement for a few Penn State defensive line targets. Does this negatively affect Penn State's chances of landing these players in the region because more spotlight nationally, or is this just updating to the actual opinion of a lot of schools, and we're just catching up to that right now with these rankings?
The way that you worded it is both, because these guys have tremendous offer lists. They have tremendous opportunities for official visits. It just so happens that these guys are now highly ranked, and that's going to change things. Yes, it's going to make it tougher. It's going to make it, as you know, Nate would say if he was on here, more expensive. It's going to make it so that these things might go a little bit longer as those things play out. Penn State's got, we put 3 guys up at the top of Penn State's edge board. And this was week 2 ago before all these things happened. Zion Ali, who's the number 1 player in the country, is committed to Maryland, says he shut it down. Okay. Carter Meadows, who is now a 5-star, number 6 overall, pretty high. But he is a guy that is right at the top of Penn State's board. And Luke Wafel, whose brother just transferred to Penn State. He was a 3-star prospect last week, or 2 days ago at least. Now he's number 19 overall in the country. So that's pretty good scouting. First off, those are the top 3 targets on the defensive line, or in the defensive end position, which is a great board for Penn State. If you look at the region, if you look beyond, if you look at the guys coming in for official visits, there's a lot of really good ones out there. But those guys are now in the elite. Like, they're not that they weren't elite talent before, but everybody's going to notice. You take a look at these when these rankings come out, and the guys that you're trying to keep secrets on. Grayson McHugh, the offensive lineman at LaSalle College. He went from unranked to number 276 in the country. So he's now a 4-star prospect. Wisconsin offered last night. NC State offered. More offers will come from McHugh when they see that stuff. Wafel, Texas, Tennessee was already in there. Messiah Hampton. And this is kind of probably not to do with the rankings, but he's up to number 165. If you're listening to the show, you know I'm a big Messiah Hampton fan. Oregon offered yesterday. Now, Oregon did hire Ross Douglas, former Penn State commit Ross Douglas, from Syracuse. They had a prior relationship. Oregon offered yesterday. It kind of comes together. In fact, I'm surprised it waited this long, but that's kind of where we're at with that. But you've got a bunch of these guys who now the secret's out, and now it's going to be tougher because you're trying to finish off these classes with the cream of the crop, with the whipped cream on top. The stuff that makes it a top 5, top 10 class are these top level guys. Yeah. And it's hard to sign those guys, especially if you're Penn State, who was competing, as you guys said in the first half of the show, with Alabama, with Ohio State, with all those schools that, certainly have deep pockets. So, yes, it absolutely will matter. Carter Meadows is very interesting to me because this is a Gonzaga kid in every sense of the imagination. High academic, awesome kid to deal with, fantastic, just like sort of presence about him, like Olu had, like a lot of those Gonzaga kids have. He's a high academic kid. He's always wanted to go to a place with, that kind of combination. Now he's number 6 player in the country. Now everybody's going to go after him. So does that stuff matter? We've said the stuff about Manny Iheanacho, and, I think Maryland's his leader now. So there's a lot to go on because things change when you get up in that atmosphere as a top 20, 30, 50 prospect.
Yeah. I just think it's super interesting. Carter Meadows, Luke Wafel. I haven't seen any full game footage of Luke Wafel yet, but his highlights, just those, they could not be 2 different prospects from that perspective. And yet both are top 20 prospects at the same position. Just football's interesting. That's really all it is. Football is an interesting thing. And I would be interested to see what they would look like in the same recruiting class. That'd be kind of fun to watch. Anything here left over from the rankings, or do you want to get onto the OV schedule?
The rankings. Kari Adams, we've been talking about him for a while. The cornerback from Maryland, Penn State top target, one of the top targets. He went up 200 and some spots to number 30 overall. I think on 3, kind of catching up with everybody else there. So I think that's a good one. He's got the speed, he's got the size, he's got the tape, he's got everything. Ben Congdon's an interesting one to me. Offensive lineman from Ohio. Phil Troutwine has, I think, offered every tackle that's above 6'7" in the country. And Congdon's one of those guys that's really risen in the last couple of months. Went down to Miami, went down to Florida. He's going to take an official visit to Penn State, but he's the number 176 overall. So just a boom of guys that you can see on the rise. Like, you can see it in look, offer lists are not the way to rate guys anymore because everybody offers everybody. Like, that's not how you do things, but you can see the trends of when guys get offers or when guys have the opportunity to take official visits. That's a big thing with me right now is you're looking at, hey, Penn State's offered 350, 400, 2026 prospects. You're going to get 60 official visits. And it feels like more than that right now, because it seems like every hour somebody else is putting out an official visit graphic.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of how you whittle down the board. Is like, we were doing bios this week for our magazine. It's like, okay, this kid picked Penn State over Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, whatever, but took official visits to Washington and, a couple other schools. So like
Right.
you're actually picking over the schools that have the opportunity to give you official visits over the check mark beside the name. So that's kind of where I'm standing with that. So, and speaking of official visits, there are so many right now. It was really exciting a couple of weeks ago when these things started popping onto the radar, and all of a sudden you guys got fatigued because there's just so many of them happening. Among the newest ones, Virginia wide receiver Travis Johnson. I like him a lot. He's got some real speed, some real size, heck of a basketball player as well. Just finishing up his basketball season. He's going to be back at Penn State in June. A bunch of defensive backs have set up official visits. Sean Johnson from Maryland, Amari Polidor from Maryland as well, and CJ Brono, Nebraska commit, who was a MVP, a positional MVP at Under Armour Orlando over the weekend. He's got a 10.33 100. He's got some size to go with that. Yeah, he can run. So pretty impressive. Speaking of Under Armour MVPs, Brian Harris, who we've talked about a couple times from Mandarin down in Jacksonville. Penn State offered recently. He stepped back from his Maryland commitment a couple of, I guess it was last weekend. Now all of a sudden he's got a Penn State official visit set up. So I like what Penn State's doing. Like they're flooding the board in terms of official visits. And I don't think all these will happen. I think we're going to see nationally a lot of changes on the official visit schedule because you look at the calendar. Last year at this time, I think Ryan and I were talking earlier this week, and last year at this time, Penn State had like 4 or 5 on the docket, like official visits. Now there's over 40. This is a product of sort of the game of telephone where you see guys start to set up official visits. And then you call up schools and say, hey, I want to take an official visit. Do I have that available? And they say, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You do. Why wouldn't you? And that's just part of recruiting. And then that waterfall goes where all of a sudden everybody's setting up official visits. I think there's well over a dozen offensive linemen that have official visits set up. Obviously, Penn State's not going to take 12 offensive linemen, but you got to put yourself in position for the next step. And that's kind of what we always talk about with recruiting. So Ben Congdon set up a visit. Grayson McHugh, who we talked about a little bit before, set up a visit. Xavier Payne, Florida State offensive line commit. He's set up a visit. So if you want to follow this stuff, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com is the place to go. Ryan had a very clear picture of things over the weekend with official visits. But things have gotten really hot, really fast. And now I think you guys are probably tired of it because it's just oversaturated with these things. So we'll see when those schedules change, and when they do, you can read about it on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.
And of course, you can do that. You sign up now for just $1. You get access to the site for a week. You can try it out. If you miss the $1 a week for a year, you missed that promo. Sorry, you should have acted when you had the chance. Now it's back to you get it for $1 for a week, and you can try us out, see if you like it, see if that information is going to keep you coming back for the rest of time and eternity, which happens to a lot of people, by the way. Sign up, and then you get access for a year after that. Another thing that you get is access to the BWI mailbag. We have a submission thread that goes up the night before the show when we do the mailbag. So if you keep track, that's Monday night most nights. And our subscribers get first dibs at asking questions here on the show. We're going to get to that right now. Of course, this was on. We're going to get to this a little bit later. I'm cheating. Everything here at the end of the show is the mailbag. Winter workouts begin today, says Z-Man. Yes, we'll be talking about that in just a second. But I want to make sure we get to the questions because people took the time to ask us, and I think it would be rude, and I'm rude more often than not when not getting to all the questions I want to. Okay, so this one, I think we'll start off with this one from Scott. Saw Saquon Barkley offered his jersey number to a kid recently. Not sure. Personally, I didn't see any of that, so I don't know which player. Not sure whether schools approve that or knew of it, but assume that they did. Makes him wonder whether the staff used former players to help recruit kids. Nate, that last part, legends of the game, are they used as recruiting tools outside of announcing the pick on signing day in December?
I think that's a Fitz question.
Did I say Nate? I'm sorry. Fitz, I'm sorry.
And I was wondering why you were going there as well, but I was very curious to hear his answer.
I was looking at the tiny picture of Fitz, and somehow I said Nate. I think it's because Nate was like leaning into his camera and getting my attention. Sorry, that's Fitz.
In the chat earlier, I said Chris Ash was the new OSU defensive coordinator. I don't know what I was thinking. It was a bad one. But no. So yes and no. You can't use former players to help recruit kids. Now, what does that mean? It means Saquon's not making calls to running back recruits saying, hey, you should go to Penn State. If they come across each other, yes. Do I buy this story as presented? Not exactly, because the story behind it is, hey, I talked to Saquon a couple times. He said I could have his number if I went to Penn State. There's some humoring going on there. I'm not going to lie. Now, if there are prior relationships, and I don't know the kids, I actually don't know the kid offhand, but if there are prior relationships, yes, absolutely. You can work on those, lean on those, things like that. If you run into them on campus, if they're back in town for something. But yeah, these guys are not recruiters. They're not the recruiting staff. It's pretty cool that they're around sometimes. And like when Saquon comes back, and if they have a junior day, that's all he's. I mean, it's a photo shoot, right? It's just lining them up because these guys want to take photos with them. I don't blame them. But no, it's not an active situation where former players are helping to recruit kids. The cool thing about the culture that this program has is that they have the stars that will vouch for the program. Like that, that is a pretty cool thing. Not everybody will do that. But you've got guys like Saquon. Micah even does some great things, with encouraging people to go to Penn State. It's not necessarily him, doing the work that Alan Zamitis does or Kenny Sanders does or that recruiting staff. So yes and no, but I think there's a little bit more gray than was presented in the graphic, the story, whatever told there. So it's a rule that you can't do it, but if there's happenstance, it does happen.
And it certainly doesn't hurt that Saquon Barkley is on everybody's TV on the most watched show of all time, playing football in the Super Bowl and being one of the most famous people in the NFL. So all that stuff is just
he can't do. Yeah.
Right. This one for both of you, and Nate, I am going to start with you on this one. Poncho 570. What player expected to be back from injury are you most looking forward to seeing this spring, Nate?
Uriah Fisher. It's always the same answer. Honestly, I have an interest in Jackson Smolik. I want to see what he looks like. I don't know if we will see what he looks like, but I think that I have some intrigue there because he seems to possess some intangible qualities.
Do you read my scouting report, Nate?
Penn State just likes guys like that. And so, the notion that he will, pass like two ships in the night through his Penn State career, which is, I think, the outside expectation, right? With Grunkmeyer kind of waiting there in the wings. I'm not sure that I buy that. I'm not right. And I'm not saying like, Grunk doesn't have a place. I just think there can be a competition. It's not. Yeah, well, and there is this anointing process. Everyone wants one to bequeath the other, and there to be, there's a clear line of lineage here. And to a lot of fans, Jackson Smolik is not a part of it. And you're saying he is absolutely going to insert himself into the conversation. I'm not saying absolutely, but I am saying I'm intrigued. Yes. Watching his high school film, he did some of those things that Penn State fans love. That his team won games, but the way they won them, late game-winning drives, him throwing a critical pass over the middle for a touchdown, like there are certain things with him that I think the problem is I don't think it's going to show up in training camp the way that we would see. Like I don't think it's going to show up in a blue-white game necessarily. Is there a guy you're interested in?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, first off, you're looking at guys that won't be back, like Alonzo Ford and Anthony Donka, like the big ones that'll take a while. Andrew Rappelier, but a couple guys. I mean, we saw a lot of Keon Wiley at the end of the season in terms of practice. We did not see him in. I guess we didn't watch him in contact, and we didn't watch him. He didn't make it in the games, but he's a vital part of that linebacker unit, just as he would have been if he would have been healthy last year. Offensively, not a ton of injuries to go around. Mentioned Rappelier, but Caden Saunders, always interested with wide receivers. That's a big one right there. Is how does he fit into the mix? And can he turn the corner? Can he make it? And does the health change a lot of things for these guys? And you need you guys talked about receivers in the portal and all that kind of stuff in the spring, but you got to see what you've got, or you're going to have an opportunity to see what you have on campus right now and then determine that. Kyron Hudson was the winter workout guy of the day for the receivers today. So you'll see where that progress takes you.
I think that those are the two correct answers. When it comes to Keon Wiley, I just want to know what position he's going to play. Like we have an idea, and we've talked about where we think he is best suited for, where Penn State needs, but is a guy that everyone talks about as an edge rusher. Like we talk about people and where they're going to play, and everyone's like, well, what about as an edge rusher? Because he used to play defensive end in high school and he has blitzing abilities. And I'm like, they need a linebacker. And he's a veteran, and he seems like a really smart guy because he can play all these positions. I just want to know, like, what's the plan? That'd be a great place to start with Keon Wiley for sure.
And I'm contractually obligated to mention Liam Andrews, who missed the entire year last year. He's ready to go, and I think he's kind of chomping at the bit to get where he needs to go to potentially break into the back end of that rotation. I don't know how defensive tackle is going to play out. It's a wild card for sure, but we'll talk a little bit maybe more about how other guys fit into that piece. But those freshmen are now growing up, and they're going to be important parts of that room, not just this year, but beyond as well. Yeah,
that's a position where a lot can change very quickly this spring. So this one, Nate, this last one here that we have, if you got any questions, you want to throw them in the chat. We have a little bit of time here, but I wanted to make sure we got to these questions first. We're going to circle back to our original conversation about Pat Kraft. Losie's mustache asked a great question, and also epic username. I'm contractually obligated to ask any questions from Losie's mustache. It's a very long one, but basically Pat Kraft said they're planning on spending the $20.5 million of revenue sharing across all 31 major sports. Basketball, fencing was an example, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He's asking, when it comes to brass tacks, do you think they'll honestly pay for non-revenue sports as football or basketball to go and get and compete for championships in track and field, Olympic sports, et cetera? Because that was what he proposed yesterday during that press conference.
In the sense that they will offer scholarships where there currently are none. Yes. Right. You just have to change the scale. You're not talking about $1 million for a top fencer, or even, well, I don't know the wrestling lands. Like, I don't know what those guys make. I have no concept of what a top wrestler draws. But right. Put it this way, if right now they've got 9.9 scholarships kind of split up and cut into pieces among however many people there are on a wrestling team, that is a feature that they can bring to the table moving forward to say, hey, your scholarships are fully funded. Everybody has a scholarship, and plus there's over the top stuff that's available to some of those sports. So, no, right? Like the front facing answer is no on whether or not Penn State will, become this major player in bringing in the top whatever at any sport based on a financial component of saying, oh, top dollar, right, above and beyond. I don't think it's that. I think it's, hey, we can offer some money for like you could get your school paid for, and that's a major bonus.
And to a larger degree than Penn State seems committed to maintaining all of its varsity sports, all 31 varsity sports in this new model. They will not be cutting to then emphasize more on football or on basketball. Is that a fair subtext to that conversation, or is that still in the decision process?
I think these things are fluid. I don't think, or I think that Pat Kraft does not want to cut sports. Right? It's so interesting to me, this dialogue and the narrative that happens, because I think Penn State fans care about it, but don't have any idea who the coach of the swimming and diving team is, right? Or any of those players.
Well,
right?
It's a great thing. 31 varsity sports, just like 107,000 fans. It's a number to be proud of without going and digging into the details.
Yeah, it's again, I always come back to the same place, which is, if these things are important to your identity as a institution of higher education, pay for them. Find the funding to pay for it. Like, if it matters to you, if it's something that is important, And I think that it is in a lot of ways. It's actually very important to development, right? The fact that they have, Peter Tombros, right? You've got guys, Panzer, guys whose names are on stadiums didn't play football, right? Like they didn't necessarily come from sports, but there is a direct correlation to success after college and playing at Division I levels of athletics. It's a direct correlation that these people go on to have success financially, right, and in their careers. So if it matters to you, then fund them, because the reality is now you've got to pay players for the sports that make money. If you're going to compete in those sports, and that is men's basketball and football, then you've got to pony up. And I think that Penn State and Pat Kraft are very committed to doing so, while carving out space for and putting an emphasis on continuing to generate the funds to direct to those other sports, so that those other, again, I just call it the Criterion Collection, right? These are the Oscar winning films that don't kill it in the box office, but are a source of pride for Penn State. Women's soccer, women's volleyball, field hockey, you name it. There's a bunch of sports that have a ton of success that at the point, he mentioned it yesterday, that talking about different programs in different points in their trajectories, where if you realize and you recognize which of those sports are poised for that level of success, then he wants to be all in on those. And right. I think that is a valid and warranted move and approach to take.
Z-Man asks, do they still have the Director's Cup? Yes, as they still have the Director's Cup. That is something that I think Penn State is interested in winning on a regular basis, or at least being in contention with, as they have been in the top 10 or 15 for quite a while. He also asks...
They're in, T-Frank, they're in third right now.
Third.
I have that open. Okay. North Carolina number 1, Stanford number 2, Penn State 3, BYU 4, Virginia 5. So that's your Director's Cup update from this side of the... Yeah.
I like that. We need to get that sponsored. Z-Man asks, Smith Vilbert move inside. Of course, I'm giving myself more work by doing that. Smith Vilbert move inside. I was having a conversation with somebody recently who was thinking about signing up for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, and we talk about it here on the show, and they're like, yeah, I don't really have a use for going and talking to people on the internet about football. I just want to get... I'm not interested in message board culture. Z-Man asked a question that we answered on the Blue White Illustrated message board this past weekend. So it's not just about the community people and continuing this particular conversation. It's about going and getting the details that we don't always talk about because we're running out of time here on this particular show. So our Friday chat, our articles, the in-depth analysis that we do on the site, that's a great reason for you to check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Because again, we've got about 2 minutes left on the show, so we can't get to all these things. But yes, we did have an answer to that on the message board. We also have winter workouts and winter workout winners. Can somebody run these down quickly for us to end the show? Because everybody wants to know, and we have the answers. Fitz, you're our facts guy today for the show. You already gave us Kyron Hudson. Who are the other players on the list?
Yeah, I kind of start with Zariah Fisher. We just talked about it, defensive end. I hope that's the case. I hope everything works out, because he certainly deserves it. He certainly worked hard enough to get back from a second ridiculous injury that cost him entire season. So Zariah Fisher, defensive end, is the eye catcher. Drew Aller, heard of him? He was number 1 today for Danny O'Brien. Drew Shelton, Joey Schlaffer at tight end, fulfilling the Berks County, sorry, Nate, the Berks County quota there. Elliot Washington at corner, Quentin Martin at running back with new running backs coach Stan Drayton, Kyron Hudson, as we mentioned, at receiver, Kari Jackson at linebacker. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Kari at some point. Had a great interview with him a few weeks ago. Zaki Wheatley at safety, and Riley Thompson on the special teams. So I think that's probably it. Maybe missing. I know they have so many coaches that are out there right now that maybe we're missing somebody, but that seems to be the rundown for day one.
All right, and we'll keep you up to date with those at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com as we go through winter workouts. Tomorrow's show is going to be a little bit different, still TBD. Greg is on vacation, and I forbid him from working, so he literally is a guy that will work while on vacation in Florida or on Daytona. I don't know where he is. I purposely don't want to know, because I don't want to accidentally ask him anything. So tomorrow's show, I'll be on air, and then we'll figure it out after that. So join us. And then, of course, Thursday is the recruiting show and more at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. For Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer, I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We will talk to you tomorrow.